On the night of our 25th wedding anniversary, my wife Patricia took the microphone from my hand in front of 200 guests. Everyone thought she was going to profess her undying love, or maybe make a toast to the life we had built together. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye, her lips curled into a cruel smirk, and said, "25 years is enough, Henry. I am bored. I want someone younger, someone with life left in them. I want you out of this apartment by tomorrow morning." The room went silent. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought I was just a senile old man she could discard like yesterday's trash because she had her name on the company papers. But she forgot one tiny, crucial detail. The penthouse she was standing in the floor, she was stomping her expensive heels on, it didn't belong to her. And what I did next left her absolutely speechless. If you have ever given your heart and soul to someone only to be stabbed in the back when you were most vulnerable, hit that like button right now. My name is Henry Sullivan. Most folks call me Hank, and this is the story of how I taught my ungrateful wife and her young lover a lesson they will never forget. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. It helps me to know I am not alone in this fight. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. The crystal chandeliers were glittering overhead, casting a warm glow over the ballroom of our penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The Chicago skyline was shining behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, a view that cost me millions of dollars and 40 years of breaking my back in the construction business. I stood there in my tuxedo, which felt a little tighter around the waist than it did a decade ago, holding a glass of vintage champagne. I looked around the room at the faces of people I called friends. There were business partners I had made rich, politicians I had supported, and neighbors I had helped. I tapped my spoon against the glass, the sharp ring cutting through the chatter. I cleared my throat, feeling that familiar swell of pride and love. Patricia was standing near the grand piano wearing a red silk dress that I had bought her from Paris. She looked stunning, I will give her that. At 52, she still turned heads. I was 70. And I knew the years were showing on my face, carved by the wind and the sun, of construction sites, but I thought we had a bond that went deeper than skin. I raised my glass and said, "Patricia, my love, 25 years ago, I promised to build you a world worthy of you. Looking around tonight, I hope I have kept that promise." I expected a smile. I expected a kiss. What I got was a laugh. A cold, sharp laugh that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Patricia walked over not with the grace of a wife, but with the swagger of a predator who smells blood. She snatched the microphone from my hand. The feedback screeched through the speakers, making everyone wince. "Oh, save it, Henry," she said, her voice amplified and booming through the hall. "We are all tired of your old war stories. You built this. You did that. We get it. You are the great Hank Sullivan. But let's be honest. You are just a tired old man now." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. I stood there, my hand still raised, the champagne warming in my palm. I thought it was a joke. A bad joke, but a joke. "Patricia, honey," I said quietly, reaching for her arm. "Maybe you have had a little too much wine." She recoiled from my touch as if I were contagious. She stepped back, creating a stage for herself. She looked at the crowd, then back at me, with eyes I didn't recognize. They were cold, hard, and empty of any affection. "I am perfectly sober, Henry," she announced. "In fact, I have never been more clear-headed. I am doing this now because I want everyone to witness it. I am filing for divorce." The glass slipped from my fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silence. No one moved to help. No one gasped. I saw Jason, her son, my stepson, the boy I had raised since he was a toddler, leaning against the bar. He wasn't shocked. He was smirking. He raised his glass to his mother in a silent salute. They had planned this. Patricia continued pacing around me like I was a condemned prisoner. "Look at you. You are past your prime. You fall asleep in front of the TV at 8. You forget where you put your keys. You are an anchor. Henry and I am done dragging you around. I have found someone who can actually keep up with me. Someone who understands the modern world. She gestured vaguely to the back of the room, but I didn't turn to look. I couldn't take my eyes off her. This woman who I had nursed through sickness, whose debts I had paid, whose son I had put through the best universities, was stripping me of my dignity in front of the entire city elite. And don't worry about the logistics, she added, her voice dripping with venom. Since the company is under my management now, and this penthouse is a corporate asset, I am exercising my executive right. I want you to vacate the premises by tomorrow morning. Take your truck. Go back to that little shack in the suburbs where you came from. You will be more comfortable there. It smells like old people and failure. Just like you. The room erupted in low murmurs. I saw smiles. I saw people covering their mouths to hide their amusement. These people who drank my wine and ate my food were enjoying the show. They loved seeing the giant fall. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like molten steel in my veins. My hands, calloused and strong, curled into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to remind her that the only reason she had management rights was because I signed them over when she claimed she wanted to help me retire. But I didn't. I took a deep breath. I remembered who I was. I am Hank Sullivan. I build skyscrapers on unstable soil. I know how to handle pressure. I looked at Jason. He was laughing now, whispering something to a waiter. I looked at Patricia. She was waiting for me to beg. She wanted tears. She wanted a scene she could use in court to prove I was unstable. I stepped closer to her. The microphone was still in her hand, but I didn't need it. I leaned in, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. I lowered my voice to a growl that only she could hear, a tone I used to use when a foreman tried to cut corners on my job site. You have made a big play tonight, Patricia, I whispered. You think you hold all the cards because you see my name on the retirement papers. But you forgot to check the foundation of the house you are trying to steal. Enjoy the view tonight. Really look at it. Because when the sun comes up, you are going to realize that you just evicted yourself from the only life you have ever known. I pulled back and saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Just a second of hesitation. But she shook it off and laughed nervously into the microphone. See? He is mumbling. Senile. Someone call him a cab. I didn't say another word. I turned my back on her. I turned my back on the guests who were avoiding my gaze. I walked across the marble floor, the sound of my dress shoes echoing in the silence. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't take a coat. I just walked straight to the elevator. As the heavy brass doors closed, shutting out the sound of the party and the woman who had just shattered my life, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The silence of the elevator was a relief. I watched the numbers tick down. Penthouse to lobby. My phone buzzed in my tuxedo pocket. I pulled it out. The screen was cracked just a little from when I dropped it at a site last week. It was a message from the private investigator I had hired a week ago, just on a hunch. A gut feeling that something was wrong when she started having late meetings. The message read, I got the photos, Hank. Entry to the Motel 6 off the interstate, 9 p.m. last Tuesday. And I got the guy's ID. It is worse than we thought. Do you want me to release them to her lawyer now? I stared at the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could ruin her night right now. I could send those photos to the projector in the ballroom and humiliate her while she was still cutting the cake. But that was too easy. That was messy. I didn't just want to embarrass her. I wanted to destroy the trap she had built for me. I wanted to pull the rug out so hard she wouldn't know she was falling until she hit the concrete. I typed back 2 words. Not yet. The elevator doors opened to the cold, windy Chicago night. I stepped out not as a husband, but as a man at war. The engine of my old Ford F-150 hummed a low, steady rhythm that vibrated through the worn leather seat. It was a sound I had not heard in years, buried under the silence of luxury sedans and chauffeured town cars. But tonight, parked in the corner of a 24-hour public lot near the Navy Pier, it was the only thing keeping me warm. The Chicago wind was howling off the lake, rattling the windows, trying to find a way in to freeze the marrow of my bones. I adjusted the heater vent, blasting hot, dry air onto my hands. I looked down at them. My hands were trembling not from the cold, but from the adrenaline that was slowly draining out of my system, leaving behind a hollow ache. I was still wearing my tuxedo, the bow tie undone and hanging loose around my neck like a noose. It felt ridiculous, sitting in a construction truck in a $3,000 suit. But this truck was the only thing I had left that truly belonged to me. I ran my thumb over the thick, jagged scar that ran across my left palm. I got that scar 40 years ago when a steel beam slipped on a job site in the South Side. I caught it before it could crush my apprentice's leg. It took 12 stitches and I was back at work the next morning. That scar was the foundation of everything I built. It was the price of the penthouse, the cars, the jewelry, the life that Patricia had just snatched away with a microphone and a smirk. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, trying to block out the image of her face. But the silence didn't last long. My phone, tossed onto the passenger seat amidst old blueprints and empty coffee cups, began to buzz violently against the vinyl. The screen lit up the dark cab. It was Jason. For a split second, a foolish, desperate part of me thought he was calling to check on me. Maybe he had come to his senses. Maybe he had realized that letting his mother kick his stepfather out onto the street was wrong. I picked up the phone, my voice raspy. "Hello, Jason." I expected a hello. I expected an apology. Instead, I got a scream that nearly blew out the speaker. "What the hell did you do to the cards?" Hank, I blinked, the sudden aggression hitting me harder than the cold. I sat up straighter. "Excuse me, I am at the club." Jason shouted, the bass of loud music thumping in the background. "I just tried to pay for a bottle service for the guys, and the waiter told me the card was declined." "Declined, Hank. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? Unfreeze it. Now." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. This boy who was 26 years old, who I had taught to ride a bike, whose tuition at private schools I had paid for, without blinking, whose DUI legal fees I had covered to keep his record clean, was calling me 3 hours after his mother ended our marriage. And he wasn't asking where I was sleeping. He was asking why the money tap had run dry. I looked out the windshield at the gray, desolate parking lot. A stray plastic bag was caught in a whirlwind of dust under a street lamp. "Your mother said she wanted me out, Jason," I said, my voice steady and low. "She said she wanted to take over the management. If she is the manager, she can pay your bills. I canceled my supplementary cards 10 minutes ago." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a scoff that sounded exactly like Patricia's. "Are you serious right now? You are going to be petty. You are really going to punish me because you couldn't keep your wife happy?" I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "I am not punishing you, son. I am just—" "Don't call me son," he cut me off, his voice dripping with venom. "You are not my father. You never were. You were just the guy who paid for things. You were the ATM, Hank. That is it. And now that the machine is broken, you are useless. Mom was right. You are just a pathetic old man holding on to money you are too senile to spend. Fix the card, or I swear to God, I will make sure the lawyers strip you of every last dime you have hidden away." The line went dead. He didn't even wait for a response. He just hung up, confident that his threat would make me scramble to fix his problem. I slowly lowered the phone. The words hung in the cramped air of the truck cab. "You were just the ATM." 20 years of parenting, of worrying, when he was sick of cheering at his graduation, reduced to a transaction. I wasn't a father to him. I was a bank account with a pulse. I should have cried. A normal man would have broken down right there. But the tears didn't come. Instead, something else clicked into place inside me. It was the same feeling I used to get when I looked at a pile of rubble and saw a skyscraper. It was clarity. If they wanted to treat this like a business transaction, then I would treat it like a hostile takeover. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out my old laptop. It was a heavy, battered machine, thick as a brick covered in dust and scratches. Patricia and Jason used sleek, thin tablets and MacBooks. They used to make fun of this thing, calling it a dinosaur. They didn't know that this dinosaur held the keys to the kingdom. I opened it up, the screen flickering to life with a blue glow. I connected it to the truck's Wi-Fi hotspot. My fingers, thick and scarred, moved across the keyboard with a speed that would have shocked them. I wasn't just a man who poured concrete. I was a man who understood systems. When I renovated the penthouse 5 years ago, I installed the smartest security system money could buy. Patricia insisted on having cameras everywhere for security. She had changed the passwords to the app on her phone, thinking that locked me out. She forgot that I was the one who hardwired the server. I bypassed the user login and went straight into the admin route. A grid of 9 video feeds popped up on my screen. The image was crystal clear, high definition, streaming in real time. My breath caught in my throat. There was my living room. The party was over. The guests were gone. The cleaning crew was working in the background, but in the center of the room, on my Italian leather sofa, sat Patricia and Tyler. Seeing them together on the screen was visceral. It was like watching a car crash. Tyler, the young personal trainer who I had paid a fortune to help Patricia get in shape, was kicked back with his feet up on my coffee table. He was laughing, his head thrown back. But it wasn't just his presence that made my blood boil. It was what he was wearing. He had stripped off his suit and was wearing my robe. My favorite silk robe, the navy blue one with my initials HS embroidered on the pocket. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. And in his hand, he held a wine glass. I zoomed in on the bottle sitting on the table next to him. It was a Chateau Margaux, 1982. A bottle I had bought at an auction 10 years ago. I had been saving it. I had told Patricia a dozen times that we would open that bottle on the day I fully retired, the day we would finally travel the world together. Now this stranger, this boy who had never worked a hard day in his life, was chugging it like it was cheap soda. I watched as Patricia leaned over and kissed him, giggling like a schoolgirl. She picked up the bottle and poured him more, spilling a few crimson drops onto the white rug. She didn't care. Why would she? She thought she owned it all now. Tyler said something, and thanks to the high-sensitivity microphones I had installed, his voice came through the laptop speakers, tinny but clear. "This is the life, baby. You were right. The old man really knew how to stock a bar." "What else is hidden in this place?" Patricia stroked his hair. "Everything," she purred. "We have the accounts, the cars, the house. And tomorrow the lawyers are going to file the capacity motion. By next week I will have power of attorney. He won't be able to touch a cent without my permission." Tyler swirled the wine in my glass. "To the ATM," he toasted, mocking Jason's words. "To the ATM," Patricia agreed, clinking her glass against his. I sat there in the dark, freezing truck, watching them toast to my destruction. The pain in my chest hardened into something cold and heavy like a stone. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was sleeping in a motel, crying into a pillow, waiting for their mercy. They had no idea I was watching. They had no idea that while they were drinking my wine and planning my funeral, I was sitting in the dark, recording every single second of it. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small black notebook. I opened it to a fresh page. I didn't write down my feelings. I didn't write down a diary entry. I wrote down a list. Item 1, the bank. Item 2, the trust. Item 3, the girl. I closed the laptop, cutting off the image of their celebration. I wasn't tired anymore. The engine purred beneath me, a sleeping beast ready to wake up. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going back to the suburbs to hide. I had work to do. And the first stop was a place Patricia had tried very hard to make me forget. The revolving doors of the First National Bank on State Street usually welcomed me with a smooth, heavy swoosh that sounded like success. I had banked there for 40 years. I knew the branch manager, the tellers, and even the security guard, who always asked about my truck. But that morning, as I stepped onto the polished marble floor, the atmosphere felt different. It was quieter, colder. I walked up to the counter where Sarah, a woman I had known since she was a fresh intern, was counting a stack of bills. I offered her a tired smile and slid my debit card across the granite. I needed $5,000 in cash. I needed to buy equipment, I needed to pay the investigator, and I needed to eat. Sarah picked up the card, but she didn't smile back. Her face went pale. She typed something into her computer, paused, and then typed it again. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Mr. Sullivan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "I am so sorry. The system. It says your accounts have been frozen." I frowned, leaning in closer. "That is impossible, Sarah. I have over $2 million in liquid assets in those accounts. Try it again." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It is not a technical error, Hank. It is a legal hold. A court order was uploaded into our system at 9 o'clock this morning. It flags you as a high-risk individual under temporary guardianship review. I cannot give you a single cent." My blood ran cold. I stood there paralyzed as the people in line behind me started to shuffle impatiently. Guardianship. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. That was for people who couldn't feed themselves, for people who didn't know what day it was. I looked at Sarah, saw the pity in her eyes, and I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my card and turned around, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, the bright morning sun blinding me for a second. I didn't get 2 steps before a shadow fell over me. "Hello, Henry." I knew that voice. It was smooth, oily, and reeked of expensive cologne. I squinted against the glare to see frantic pedestrians parting like a stream around a man standing directly in my path. It was Vance, Patricia's lawyer. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house, and a smile that didn't reach his shark-like eyes. He wasn't alone. 2 large men in dark suits stood a few feet behind him, their arms crossed. Vance held out a thick manila envelope. "I suggest you take this, Henry," Vance said, his tone dripping with false concern. "It is for your own good. We filed an emergency motion this morning. Given your erratic behavior at the party last night and your history of confusion, the judge granted a temporary freeze on all your assets." I stared at the envelope, my hands balling into fists. My behavior, I was defending myself. Vance sighed, tapping a sleek tablet he was holding in his other hand. "It is not just the party, Henry. It is the pattern. Patricia has been very worried about you. She has been documenting your decline for months. You really should see this. It is heartbreaking, honestly." He turned the tablet screen toward me. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't look away. It was a video. The footage was shaky, shot from a cell phone. It showed me sitting in my recliner, my mouth open, fast asleep. Then it cut to a clip of me standing in the kitchen, patting my pockets, looking for my keys. Then another clip of me yelling at the television during a football game. But it was the audio that made my stomach churn. It was Jason's voice behind the camera. "Look at him," Jason whispered in the recording. "He has been sitting there for hours. He doesn't even know where he is." "Dad, do you know what year it is?" In the video I stirred from my nap and mumbled something incoherent. The video cut there. It was edited. It was a montage of normal moments, a nap, After a 12-hour shift, a moment of forgetfulness that anyone has twisted into a narrative of senility. They had been filming me in my own home, my sanctuary. Every time I thought I was safe, every time I let my guard down, that snake Jason had been there recording, waiting to turn my exhaustion into evidence. They are calling it early onset dementia, Vance said softly, pulling the tablet back. The hearing is in 3 days. Until then, Patricia has been appointed your temporary guardian. She controls the accounts, the properties, and the company. She just wants to make sure you don't hurt yourself or spend your life savings on something foolish. I looked at Vance. I looked at the envelope. I realized then that this wasn't just a divorce. This was an annihilation. They didn't just want to leave me. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to strip me of my agency, my mind, and my rights. They wanted to put me in a home and drug me until I actually became the vegetable they claimed I was. Rage, hot and white, flared in my chest. I wanted to grab Vance by his silk tie and throw him into the traffic on State Street. I wanted to scream that I could still outwork, outthink, and outmaneuver every single one of them. But then I remembered the camera. I remembered the security footage I had watched last night. I remembered the long game. If I fought him now, if I screamed and made a scene on the sidewalk, I would just be giving them more footage. I would be proving their point. An angry, confused old man attacking a lawyer. I took a deep breath. I forced my shoulders to slump. I let my jaw go slack. I concentrated on my hands, commanding them to shake just a little, just enough to catch the light. I looked up at Vance, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. I don't understand, I stammered, making my voice crack. I just wanted to buy some lumber. Why can't I buy lumber? Vance's smile widened. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. A broken man. A confused old fool. He stepped closer, his posture relaxing. He thought he had already won. It is okay, Henry, he said, speaking slowly, as if to a child. Patricia will handle the lumber. You just need to sign this acknowledgement. It just says you received the papers. Then you can go back to wherever you are staying. He held out a pen. An expensive Mont Blanc. I stared at the pen. I reached for it, letting my hand tremble violently. I fumbled with it, dropping it once on the pavement. One of the bodyguards snickered. Vance bent down and picked it up, placing it gently back in my fingers. Right here, Henry, he pointed to the line. I pressed the pen to the paper. I wrote my name, but I made it jagged. I skipped the middle initial. I made it look like the signature of a man whose mind was slipping away. There, I whispered. Is that okay? Perfect, Vance said, snatching the clipboard back. You are doing the right thing. Go get some rest, Henry. We will see you in court. He turned on his heel and walked away, flanked by his muscle already dialing a number on his phone. I watched him go. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long moment, letting the mask fall. I straightened my spine. I stilled my hands. The confusion vanished from my eyes, replaced by a cold, hard focus. They thought I was losing my mind. They thought they had trapped a senile old bear. But they had forgotten one thing about bears. We don't die when you corner us. We fight. And now that I knew the rules of their game, I wasn't just going to play. I was going to flip the board. I touched the pocket where I kept my burner phone. I had signed their paper, but I hadn't signed my surrender. I had bought myself 3 days. 3 days to find the evidence that would send Vance to the Bar Association Ethics Committee and Patricia to jail. I turned and walked in the opposite direction toward the subway. I didn't need a bank account to take them down. I had something better. I had the truth, and I had the keys to the only door they had forgotten to lock. The drive to the outskirts of Schaumburg took longer than I remembered. The city skyline faded into a blur of strip malls and tidy suburban lawns. I pulled the truck into the driveway of a small, neat bungalow with peeling blue paint. My heart hammered against my ribs harder than it had in the courtroom. This was the home of the only person in the world who shared my blood yet felt like a stranger. Maya, my daughter. The daughter I had failed. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment gripping the steering wheel. The last time I saw her she was 19, screaming that she hated me, that I had chosen my new perfect family over her. She was right, in a way. I had let Patricia's whispers poison my mind. Patricia had said Maya was unstable, that she was just after my money, that it was better for everyone if we had some distance. Distance turned into silence. Silence turned into 5 years. I took a deep breath, grabbed a thick manila envelope from the passenger seat, and stepped out. The air here smelled of cut grass and rain, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of the city. I walked up the cracked concrete path and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. Maya stood there wiping flour from her hands onto a worn apron. She looked old or tired, but her eyes, my mother's eyes, were sharp and guarded. She didn't smile. She didn't invite me in. She just stood in the doorway, a barrier of flesh and blood. "What do you want, Henry?" she asked, her voice flat. "Patricia finally kicked you out, so now you remember you have a daughter." The words stung, but I deserved them. I didn't flinch. "May I come in, Maya?" I asked quietly. "I am not here to ask for anything. I just want to give you something." She eyed the envelope in my hand, suspicion narrowing her gaze. "If that is money, I don't want it. I have done fine without your charity for 5 years. It is not money," I said. "It is the truth." She hesitated, then stepped back, leaving the door open just enough for me to squeeze through. The living room was small but cozy, filled with books and the smell of baking bread. It was a home, a real home, unlike the cold museum I had been living in. I sat on the edge of a floral sofa, feeling like an intruder. Maya stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. "Talk fast. I have a shift at the bakery in an hour." I opened the envelope and spread the papers on the coffee table. "These are bank statements, Maya. From the last 5 years. Every month on the 1st, I sent a check for $2,000 to the account you gave me before you left. Every single month." Maya scoffed. "Stop lying. I never saw a dime. That account was closed a week after I moved out. Patricia told me you cut me off. She sent me a letter signed by you saying I was a disappointment and to never contact you again." I pulled out another sheet of paper. It was a copy of a letter, but not the one she described. It was a letter from the bank detailing a recurring transfer to an account under the name PM Management. "PM," I said, pointing to the letters. "Patricia Miller, her maiden name." She intercepted the checks, Maya. She told me the account number had changed. She said you were grateful, but busy. She said you didn't want to talk to me because you needed space to heal. I thought I was respecting your wishes. I thought I was helping you from afar. Maya picked up the paper, her hands trembling. She read the lines, the dates, the amounts. She saw the signature on the diversion authorization. It was Patricia's handwriting. The color drained from her face. "She stole it," Maya whispered, sinking into the armchair opposite me. "She stole the money you sent for my tuition. For my rent, I had to drop out of med school, Dad. I had to work 3 jobs. I thought you hated me." I felt a lump in my throat so large I could barely speak. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I never hated you, sweetheart. I was a fool. A blind, stupid old man who let a snake whisper in his ear. I am so sorry. I know I can't buy back the years, but I swear to you I am going to make it right." Maya looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. But it wasn't sadness I saw there anymore. It was anger. A fierce, burning anger that matched my own. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up, pacing the small room. "You don't know the half of it, Dad. You have no idea who you are dealing with." "What do you mean?" I asked. Maya stopped and looked at me, a strange intensity in her gaze. You mentioned her new boyfriend. The young one. Tyler, I nodded. Yes. The personal trainer. Maya let out a bitter, hollow laugh. He is not a personal trainer, Dad. His name isn't even Tyler. It is Mitch. Mitch Reynolds. I frowned. How do you know that? Because he dated my best friend Sarah 3 years ago, she said, her voice shaking with rage. He met her at a gym in Miami. Charming, handsome, attentive. He told her he was an investment banker. He swept her off her feet, moved into her condo, and 3 months later he disappeared, along with her life savings and her jewelry. He is a pro-dad, a romance scammer. He targets older women or women with access to money. He bleeds them dry and vanishes. We went to the police, but he uses fake IDs. They never caught him. My blood ran cold. I had suspected he was a gold digger, but a professional criminal, a predator. This wasn't just about my money anymore. This was about danger. Patricia was a terrible human being, but she was walking into a trap that could leave her not just broke, but destroyed. Are you sure? I asked, my voice low. Maya went to a bookshelf and pulled out a photo album. She flipped through the pages and pulled out a Polaroid. She slammed it onto the table next to the bank statements. Look at the tattoo on his wrist, she said. The barcode. I looked. In the photo, a younger tan man was holding a drink, smiling at the camera. On his inner wrist was a distinctive black barcode tattoo. I closed my eyes, recalling the image from my security cameras last night. Tyler raising the wine glass. The sleeve of my robe falling back. The barcode. It is him, I breathed. Maya sat down next to me, her shoulder brushing mine. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't pull away. He is going to destroy her dad. He will get her to sign over everything she can, and then he will disappear. And if she has power of attorney over your assets, he will take everything I have too. I finished the sentence. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation hanging in the air. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Dad, Maya said softly. I didn't drop out of school completely. I switched majors. I am in my final year of law school. I know how these guardianship hearings work. I know what evidence we need. I looked at her, seeing the strength and resilience that had grown in the rocky soil of my neglect. I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost knocked me over. You will help me? I asked. After everything, Maya looked at the Polaroid of Tyler, then at the bank statements, then finally at me. I am not doing it for her, she said, her voice hard as flint. I am doing it for us, for the time we lost, and because I want to see the look on Mitch Reynolds' face when we take him down. She reached out and covered my scarred hand with her own. We need a plan, Dad. We need to prove he is a fraud before the judge signs that order. And we need to catch Patricia in the act of handing him the keys to the castle. I turned my hand over and squeezed hers. A plan. I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I have a plan, but I am going to need someone who knows the law, and someone who isn't afraid to get their hands a little dirty. Maya smiled back, a sharp, dangerous smile that reminded me of myself in my prime. I can skip my shift at the bakery, she said. Let's go to work. We stood up together, father and daughter, united by a common enemy, and a truth that had finally come to light. The drive back to the city wouldn't be lonely this time. I had my army, and Tyler, or Mitch, or whatever his name was, had no idea what was coming for him. The studio apartment I rented directly across the street from my own penthouse was a far cry from the luxury I was used to. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and boiled cabbage, and the radiator clanked like a dying engine. But it had the one thing I needed, a direct line of sight into the living room of the life I had left behind. Maya had gone to the law library to start drafting our counterattack, leaving me alone with my equipment. I set up a folding table near the window, arranging my laptop, a signal booster, and a high-frequency receiver. I felt less like a retired construction magnate and more like a sniper settling into a nest. I opened my laptop and tried to connect to the penthouse network. Access denied. Patricia had changed the password. She probably thought she was being clever, securing the perimeter against me. I could imagine her smug satisfaction as she typed in some new code thinking she had locked me out of my own home. But Patricia made the mistake that most people make. She thought a smart home was just software. She forgot that before it is code, it is hardware. And I was the one who installed the hardware. 3 years ago, when we retrofitted the penthouse with the latest climate control system, I insisted on a hardwired industrial-grade thermostat system. I didn't trust the cloud completely, so I had the technicians install a localized maintenance backdoor directly into the central HVAC unit. It was a failsafe, a way for the repair guys to run diagnostics without needing the homeowner's Wi-Fi password. It communicated on a low-frequency radio band completely separate from the internet. I pulled a specialized antenna out of my bag and pointed it at the penthouse window. On my screen, I ran a scanning program I used to use for site surveys. Within seconds, a green bar pinged. Carrier Infinity System detected. I smiled. The back door was wide open. Through the HVAC system's sensors, I could bridge into the rest of the local network. It was like entering a fortress through the air vents. I bypassed the firewall, ignored the new Wi-Fi password, and within 5 minutes, I had administrative control over every camera, microphone, and motion sensor in the apartment. The screen flickered, and suddenly I was back in my living room. The image was sharp 4K resolution, streaming in real time. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long orange shadows across the expensive furniture. Patricia was sitting on the beige sofa, clutching a glass of white wine. She looked stressed. Her posture was rigid, her fingers drumming nervously against the stem of the glass. Tyler was there too. He was pacing back and forth in front of her, animated, energetic. He was wearing one of my tailored suits. It was a little big in the shoulders, but he clearly thought he looked like a king. I turned up the volume on the microphone embedded in the smart speaker on the coffee table. "Babe, you are not listening to me," Tyler said, stopping in front of her and running a hand through his hair. "This isn't just an investment. It is a revolution. Future Coin is going to triple in value by next Friday." Triple. Do you know what that means? Patricia took a large sip of wine. I know, Tyler. I know. But the numbers. You are asking for $5 million. That is everything. That is the entire equity of the penthouse plus the liquid cash in the operating account. It is not spending, Patricia, Tyler said, his voice dropping to a smooth, seductive register. It is leveraging. We put the money in, we ride the spike, and we pull out with 15 million. We can buy a villa in Tuscany. We can buy a yacht. We can finally live the life you deserve without worrying about that old man's penny-pinching legacy. Patricia looked down at the floor. But to mortgage the penthouse so quickly? Vance said the guardianship papers are temporary. If Hank fights this, if the judge sees we liquidated the primary asset. Tyler scoffed, a harsh sound that made Patricia flinch. He sat down next to her, invading her space, placing a hand on her knee. Hank. You are still worried about Hank. He is sleeping in a truck. Patricia. He is a confused, broken old man. He isn't going to fight anything. He probably doesn't even remember what day it is. He squeezed her knee, his thumb rubbing circles on her skin. But maybe I was wrong about you. Patricia looked up, alarm in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, maybe you aren't the visionary woman I fell in love with, Tyler said, pulling his hand away and standing up. He walked to the window, turning his back to her. Maybe you are just like him. Scared, old, stuck in the past. Maybe you belong in a rocking chair, counting pennies, not on a yacht in the Mediterranean. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I watched, gripping the edge of my folding table until my knuckles turned white. He was weaponizing her biggest insecurity. her fear of aging, her fear of being irrelevant. Patricia stood up, setting her glass down so hard, wine sloshed over the rim. Don't say that. I am not old, and I am certainly not like him. Then prove it, Tyler spun around, his eyes locking onto hers. Take the leap. Show me that you trust me. Show me that you trust us. Or are we just playing house here because I have investors in Dubai begging to get in on this allocation? I held it for you because I love you. But if you are too scared... He let the sentence hang in the air, a threat of abandonment wrapped in a business pitch. Patricia crumbled. I saw the fight leave her body. She was terrified of losing this young, beautiful man who made her feel 20 again. She was more afraid of being alone than she was of being broke. Okay, she whispered. Okay. I will tell Vance to expedite the paperwork. We will mortgage the penthouse. Tyler's face transformed instantly. The cruelty vanished, replaced by a beaming, boyish smile. He rushed over and scooped her up in a hug, spinning her around. That is my girl, he cheered. You are a genius, Patricia. We are going to be kings and queens. I watched them embrace a cold pit forming in my stomach. She had just agreed to sign her death warrant. $5 million into a crypto scam. Once that money left the account, it would be untraceable. Tyler would vanish, and Patricia would be left with a foreclosure notice and a broken heart. But as I watched Tyler kiss her neck, I saw him glance over her shoulder. He looked directly at the smart TV, checking his reflection in the dark screen. The look on his face wasn't love. It was the smirk of a predator who had just closed the trap. I leaned back in my creaky chair in the smelly apartment. I had what I needed. I knew the timeline. I knew the mechanism. They were going to try to rush the mortgage through the bank tomorrow. Patricia thought she was investing in her future. She didn't realize she was handing me the weapon I needed to destroy them both. I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. It was a direct line to the senior vice president of lending at the bank. He was an old friend, a man who owed his career to a recommendation I wrote back in the 90s. It rang twice. Hello, a confused voice answered. Jim, it is Hank Sullivan, I said, my voice steady and cold. Don't hang up. I have a business proposition for you. A very unusual one. I watched the screen as Patricia poured another glass of wine, celebrating her ruin. Tomorrow my wife is going to come in asking for a $5 million loan against the penthouse, I told Jim. I want you to approve it. There was silence on the other end. Hank, are you crazy? I heard about the trouble. If I approve that, you lose the equity. Just listen to me, Jim, I said. Approve it. Fast-track it. Skip the due diligence. But I want you to trace exactly where that money goes. Because when the dust settles, I am going to give you the biggest fraud bust of your career. Do we have a deal? I waited. On the screen, Tyler was dancing with Patricia, leading her in a slow circle. Okay, Hank, Jim finally said. I trust you. God help us both. I hung up. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The Lakeshore Country Club was a sanctuary of old money and silence, where the only sounds were the distant thwack of a driver hitting a Titleist and the clinking of ice in crystal glasses. I drove my rusted Ford F-150 right up to the valet stand, amidst a sea of Bentleys and Porsches. The valet, a young kid named Kevin, who I had tipped generously for 3 years, didn't sneer at my truck. He rushed over and opened the door with the same respect he would show a head of state. Good afternoon, Mr. Sullivan, he said with a genuine smile. It is good to see you, sir. We heard about the trouble at the apartment. If you need anything at all, you just let me know. I handed him a 20 and patted him on the shoulder. I realized then that I had more friends in the service staff than I did in the membership directory. I wasn't wearing a tuxedo today, and I certainly wasn't wearing the rags Patricia probably hoped I was rotting in. I was wearing my best golf attire, a crisp white polo, and tailored navy slacks, looking every bit the retired tycoon I was. I walked through the mahogany doors of the clubhouse with my head held high. I could feel the eyes on me immediately. The whispers started before I even reached the hostess stand. "There goes Henry Sullivan. Did you hear his wife left him for a kid half his age? They say he is losing his marbles. Let them talk." I wanted them to look. I needed an audience for what was about to happen. I walked onto the terrace overlooking the 18th hole. The sun was high and the air smelled of freshly cut Bermuda grass and expensive cigars. And there they were. Patricia and Tyler were sitting at a prime table near the railing. They stuck out like sore thumbs. Patricia was wearing a sun hat that was too big and laughing too loudly at something the waiter said. Tyler was dressed in a neon athletic shirt that looked ridiculous against the club's traditional dress code. He wasn't relaxing. He was working. I watched from behind a pillar as Tyler leaned over to the table next to them, where old Mr. Henderson, a retired oil baron, was trying to eat his club sandwich. Tyler was talking fast, using his hands flashing that $1,000,000 smile. He was pitching. He was hunting for investors for his crypto scam right here in my backyard. I saw Mr. Henderson wave him off with a look of annoyance. Tyler's smile faltered for a second, a crack in the mask, but he quickly recovered and turned back to Patricia, grabbing her hand aggressively. They were desperate. They needed cash now to keep the charade going. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. I didn't walk toward them. I walked to a table about 10 feet away, just within earshot, but far enough to seem coincidental. The waiter, an old friend named Marco, hurried over. "Mr. Sullivan." "The usual," I nodded. "An Arnold Palmer Marco. And keep the check open." I sat down, pulling out my phone. I didn't look at Patricia. I didn't look at Tyler. I acted as if they didn't exist. But I could feel their eyes burning holes into the side of my head. I could imagine the panic rising in Patricia's chest. She had probably told everyone I was a bedridden, senile wreck, and here I was looking better than I had in years. I waited exactly 3 minutes, enough time for them to whisper to argue about whether they should leave. Then I triggered the alarm I had set on my phone. It rang with a shrill, urgent tone. I answered it immediately, putting it on speakerphone for just a second before switching to the handset, ensuring the initial burst of sound drew their attention. "George," I said loudly, my voice filled with fake frustration. "I told you to get me in on that allocation." I paused, listening to the silence on the other end. "I don't care what the buy-in is." I continued, letting my voice carry over the gentle breeze. "I am hearing whispers all over Chicago. Future Coin is tracking to do 200% by Friday. 200%, George. That is retirement money. That is island money." I risked a glance out of the corner of my eye. Tyler had frozen. His sandwich was halfway to his mouth. He was staring at me, his eyes wide. He couldn't believe it. He was hearing the name of his own fake coin coming from the mouth of the man he hated most. In his twisted, arrogant mind, this validated everything. It meant his lie was so good, so convincing, that even the smart money was chasing it. Or perhaps he thought I was just another gullible old fool falling for the hype he had created. Either way, I had his attention, but I wasn't done. I had to sell the despair. "What do you mean my liquidity is tied up?" I snapped into the phone, slamming my hand on the table. The cutlery rattled. "It is." "The divorce, isn't it? That woman frozen my accounts." "Damn it, George. Do you know what this means? I am going to miss the window. The biggest surge in crypto history, and I am going to be sitting on the sidelines because of a court order." I let my shoulders slump. I rubbed my temples, looking like a defeated man. "Fine. Fine. Just see if you can find a back door. Maybe a bridge loan. I can't let $5 million in potential profit slip through my fingers just because I can't access my capital for another week. Call me back." I hung up the phone and threw it onto the table with a theatrical clatter. I stared out at the green fairway, shaking my head. I looked like a man who had just lost a winning lottery ticket. I didn't have to wait long. I heard a chair scrape against the patio stones. Footsteps approached. I didn't look up until a shadow fell across my table. It was Tyler. He was standing there, his chest puffed out, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. Patricia was a few steps behind him, looking pale and confused. "Rough day at the office?" Hank Tyler asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I looked up at him slowly, squinting as if I was trying to place his face. "You," I grunted. "What do you want?" "Here to gloat that you are driving my car. I am here to tell you that you are losing your touch." "Old man," Tyler laughed, looking back at Patricia to make sure she was watching. I couldn't help but overhear. "Future Coin. You are trying to get into Future Coin." I narrowed my eyes, playing the suspicious, jealous investor. "What do you know about it? That is an exclusive pre-sale. Only for institutional investors." Tyler laughed again, louder this time. He leaned in, placing his hands on my table. "Exclusive, Hank. I am the institution. I have been telling Patricia about it for weeks. But you know what the difference is between you and us. We are agile. We are the future. You are just too slow." He stood up straight, adjusting his polo shirt. "Don't worry, Hank. When we cash out next week, maybe I will let you caddy for me. I am a generous guy." I glared at him, putting every ounce of hatred I had into my eyes. "You are a fool," I spat. "You don't have the capital to play in that league. That is a $5 million buy-in. Patricia doesn't have that kind of cash." Tyler smirked, glancing at Patricia. "Not yet," he said. "But we are working on it. Come on, babe. Let's go make a phone call." He grabbed Patricia's arm and practically dragged her away. I watched them go. Patricia looked back at me one last time. In her eyes, I didn't see hatred. I saw panic. She had heard me. She had heard the desperation in my voice about missing the opportunity. She trusted my business instinct more than she trusted anyone on earth. If Hank Sullivan was angry about missing out on Future Coin, then Future Coin must be the real deal. I had just removed her last doubt. I watched them rush toward the exit, Tyler already pulling out his phone, probably calling the bank to harass them about the mortgage. Patricia was walking fast, trying to keep up, her high heels clicking frantically on the pavement. She was rushing toward a cliff, convinced she was running toward a gold mine. Marco returned with my drink. I took a long sip of the iced tea, the lemon tartness cutting through the dust in my throat. I watched the valet bring my truck around, but I didn't get up yet. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the perfect manicured grass. I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. I had just pushed the woman I once loved off a ledge. I had used her greed and her insecurity to destroy her. A part of me, the part that remembered the day we said our vows, wanted to run after her and shake her, to tell her to wake up. But then I remembered the microphone. I remembered the smirk. I remembered the video of them drinking my wine and planning to put me in a home. I finished my drink and stood up. The game was in motion. The loan would be approved tomorrow morning. The money would move, and I would be there to catch it. I left a $100 bill on the table for Marco and walked out to my truck. The air was getting colder, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel the chill. I felt the heat of the fire I had just lit, and I was ready to watch it burn. The phone in my hand felt heavy, like a detonator waiting to be pressed. It was Jim calling from his corner office on the 45th floor of the bank tower. I was parked 2 blocks away, staring at the gleaming glass facade of the building where my life's savings were stored. I answered on the first ring, my voice tight. "Talk to me, Jim." He sounded breathless, almost panicked. "Hank, they are here. Patricia and that kid. She is asking for an expedited liquidity loan against the penthouse equity and a margin loan against the company's operating capital. She wants $5 million, Hank. 5 million. And she wants it wired immediately to an offshore crypto exchange wallet. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. Patricia sitting in the leather chair I had sat in 1,000 times, thinking she was making the deal of the century. Tyler hovering over her shoulder, smelling the money, his heart probably racing faster than hers. "Stop the compliance check, Jim," I said, my voice low and steady. "Hank, I can't just—" Jim stammered. "The system flagged it as high risk. The destination wallet is unverified. It is in the Cayman Islands. If I authorize this and it turns out to be fraud, my neck is on the line." "Your neck is fine," I assured him. "I am giving you verbal authorization as the primary account holder on the trust that actually owns the assets. But she doesn't know that yet. Override the flag. Bypass the cooling-off period. Give her the money, Jim. Right now." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the hum of the bank's server room in the background, the sound of millions of dollars moving invisibly through the air. "God forgive us," Jim whispered. "All right. I am pressing the override." I hung up. I didn't need to hear the rest. I pulled up the banking app on my laptop, the one linked to the shadow account I monitored. I watched the numbers. It was a digital execution. In the bank office, I knew exactly what was happening. Patricia was holding the pen. That heavy gold-plated pen that the bank gave to high-net-worth clients. Her hand was probably shaking. Not from fear, but from excitement. She was thinking about the villa in Tuscany. She was thinking about how she was finally outsmarting me. She was thinking that 5 million would turn into 15 million by Friday, and she would never have to rely on a man again. She didn't know she was signing her own death warrant. I watched the screen. Pending transaction. $5 million. I felt a strange, sharp pain in my chest. It wasn't the money. I could make more money. It was the memory of the woman she used to be. I remembered Patricia 20 years ago helping me do payroll at the kitchen table, worrying about every cent we spent. We built this fortune together, brick by brick. And now, blinded by vanity and a fear of getting old, she was throwing it all into a furnace because a boy with a barcode tattoo told her she was beautiful. Tyler was probably standing behind her, massaging her shoulders, whispering poison in her ear. "Sign it, baby. Just sign it. We are going to be free." He didn't care about her. He didn't care about the penthouse. He just wanted the transfer code. Once that money hit the blockchain, it was gone. Untraceable. Irreversible. The screen on my laptop refreshed. Processing. I gripped the steering wheel. "Don't do it, Patricia," I whispered to the empty truck cab. "Wake up. Look at him. Look at his eyes. He is eating you alive." But she couldn't hear me. Or maybe she wouldn't have listened even if she could. She was addicted to the fantasy. Approved. Transfer complete. The numbers on the screen plummeted. The balance dropped like a stone. $5 million vanished into the digital ether, sent straight to a wallet controlled by Mitch Reynolds, alias Tyler. It was done. The trap had snapped shut. I sat back in the seat, letting out a breath that rattled in my lungs. I felt drained, hollowed out. I had just orchestrated the financial ruin of my wife. It was necessary. It was justice. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like amputation. I had cut off a limb to save the body. My phone buzzed again. A text message. I picked it up. It was from Patricia. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the gloom of the truck. "You lost, old man," the message read. "We got the loan. The future belongs to those who are brave enough to take it. Don't bother coming back to the apartment. I am changing the locks again." I read it twice. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Even in her moment of triumph, she had to twist the knife. She had to make sure I knew I was defeated. She thought she had won. She thought the money was investing in her future. She didn't know it was already being laundered through a dozen shell accounts on its way to a beach in non-extradition territory. I looked at the message and slowly a smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the grim, cold smile of a man who watches his enemy celebrate on a ship that has already been torpedoed. "Enjoy the future, Patricia," I said to the phone, "because it is going to be a lot shorter than you think." I didn't reply. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an angry response. I just deleted the thread. I started the engine of the truck. The vibration felt good, solid, real. The money was gone. Tyler would be packing his bags within the hour. Patricia would be alone when the realization hit, and I had to be ready. I put the truck in gear and pulled out into traffic. Next stop was the company. Jason was playing CEO in my chair, thinking he was untouchable. He didn't know that while his mother was bankrupting herself, the company he was trying to steal was about to collapse under the weight of his own incompetence. The dominoes were falling faster now. Click, click, click. And I was the only one who could see the pattern. I drove toward the skyline, the city I had helped build, ready to reclaim what was mine. The time for sentiment was over. The time for war had just begun. I sat in my truck parked 3 blocks away from the headquarters of Sullivan Holdings. Through the telephoto lens of my camera, I could see the 35th floor. My floor. The office where I had spent nights sleeping on a couch reviewing blueprints until my eyes blurred. But today, the man sitting in my chair wasn't me. It was Jason. He had moved in with the speed of a virus. It had only been 24 hours since the court granted the temporary guardianship order giving Patricia control over my assets. She in turn had immediately signed a power of attorney, granting Jason full operational control of the company. It was nepotism at its absolute worst. I watched through the lens as Jason spun around in my leather chair, his feet kicked up on the mahogany desk that my father had carved by hand. He wasn't reviewing contracts. He wasn't looking at safety reports. He was popping a bottle of champagne with 2 of his friends from college. I knew them. Kyle and Brandon. 2 boys who had never held a shovel in their lives, who thought manual labor was something you watched on reality TV. Jason had appointed them as his new VP of Operations and Chief Strategy Officer that morning. To make room for them, he had done something unforgivable. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank, my foreman. Frank had been with me for 30 years. He was the kind of man who could look at a concrete pour and tell you if the mix was too wet just by the smell. The text read, simply, "He fired us, Hank. Me, Sarah from accounting, and Old Man Jenkins. Said we didn't fit the new vibe. He is bringing in a digital marketing team to run the sites. The kid is going to kill someone." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. They were dismantling the soul of my company. They were treating a construction empire like a tech startup, thinking they could run it with hashtags and vibes. But concrete doesn't care about your vibe. Steel doesn't care about your follower count. Gravity is a cruel mistress, and she was about to teach Jason a lesson in physics. I shifted my gaze back to the window. Jason was laughing, throwing a stress ball against the glass. He felt like a king. He had the title, the office, the salary. He thought the hard part was over. He didn't realize that the title was just a target on your back, and the salary was hazard pay. Then it happened. The red light on the emergency line in my office started flashing. I could see it from the street. It was a dedicated line hardwired to every active job site in the city. It only rang if there was a catastrophe. I saw Jason glance at it. He didn't pick it up immediately. He looked annoyed that his party was being interrupted. He let it ring. Once. Twice. Finally, he reached over and snatched the receiver, putting it to his ear with an arrogant scowl. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. I had the police scanner app open on my phone, tuned to the emergency frequencies. "Dispatch, we have a code 3 at the Riverfront Plaza site." A voice crackled through the static. "Structural failure on the retaining wall. We have water breach. Potential collapse of the main crane. Repeat crane stability is compromised. My heart stopped. The Riverfront Plaza. That was a deep excavation site right next to the Chicago River. The retaining wall was the only thing holding back millions of gallons of water and mud. If that wall failed, the entire foundation would flood, and the 200-ton crane perched on the edge would come crashing down onto the busy street below. I looked up at the window. Jason was standing now. The arrogance was gone. His face was pale even from this distance. He was listening to the site superintendent screaming in his ear. I knew exactly what the super was asking. He was asking for the contingency plan. He was asking for authorization to flood the secondary chamber to equalize pressure. He was asking for engineering decisions that required decades of experience. Jason looked at Kyle. Kyle shrugged, taking a sip of his champagne. Jason looked at Brandon. Brandon was typing on his phone, probably tweeting about his new job. Jason was alone. I saw him shouting into the phone, waving his arms. He was panicking. He didn't know what a secondary chamber was. He probably told them to just fix it. He slammed the phone down. On the scanner, the voice returned, more frantic this time. HQ is non-responsive. We are initiating evacuation. The ground is shifting. We need city engineers on site now. I closed my eyes. It was a disaster, but thankfully, Frank had trained his crew well. They were evacuating. No one would die. But the damage to the project, the lawsuits, the reputation of the company, it was catastrophic. Sullivan Holdings was bleeding out, and the man at the helm was watching it happen with his mouth open. I saw Jason pacing the office. He grabbed his cell phone. I knew who he was calling. He was calling Mommy. He was a little boy who had broken a vase and needed his mother to sweep up the glass. I pulled up the remote access to the company's phone logs on my laptop. I could see the outgoing call. He was dialing Patricia. I switched tabs to the tracker I had on Patricia's phone. She was in the Bahamas. The GPS showed she was at a beach club called the Pink Sands. I imagined the scene. Patricia lying on a lounge chair, a margarita in hand, Tyler rubbing sunscreen on her back. She was celebrating her freedom. She was spending the money she had stolen from our future. Jason's call went to voicemail. I saw him redial, again and again. Finally, it connected. I hacked into the audio stream. It was illegal, reckless, and absolutely necessary. Mom, Jason screamed, his voice cracking. Mom, you have to help me. The river wall is collapsing. The crane is leaning. The police are there. They are asking for the CEO. They want to arrest someone if that thing falls. There was a pause. Then Patricia's voice came through, tinny and distant, competing with the sound of steel drums and ocean waves. Jason frantically. I can't hear you. The reception is terrible. We are on a boat. Tyler just ordered lobster. Mom, listen to me, Jason shrieked. The company is falling apart. I don't know what to do. You need to come back. Patricia laughed. It was a high, tipsy laugh. Don't be dramatic, darling. You are the CEO now. Handle it. That is why we fought for this, isn't it? Just call what's his name? The old guy. Frank. I fired Frank. Jason yelled, tears visible in his eyes as he leaned against the glass. Well, hire him back. Patricia snapped, her patience wearing thin. Look, I have to go. Tyler is waiting for me in the water. Don't ruin my vibe, Jason. Handle it. Click. She hung up on him. She hung up on her son in the middle of a crisis to go swim with a con artist. I watched Jason stare at the phone. He slowly lowered it to his side. He looked around the office. Kyle and Brandon had stopped drinking. They were looking at the news on the TV screen mounted on the wall. The helicopter footage showed the chaos at the riverfront site. They looked terrified. They grabbed their jackets and slipped out the door, abandoning him. Jason was truly alone. He sank into my chair, but he didn't look like a king anymore. He looked small. He looked like a child wearing a suit that was too big for him. He put his head in his hands. I started the engine of my truck. I could have intervened. I could have called the site and given the order to save the wall. I still knew the codes. But I didn't. This had to happen. The board of directors, the shareholders, the city, they all needed to see this. They needed to see what happens when you replace competence with arrogance. They needed to see that the name Sullivan on the building meant nothing without the man who built it. My phone lit up. It was a notification from the stock market app. Sullivan Holdings' share price had just dropped 12% in 10 minutes. The shareholders were reacting to the news. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going to the site. I was going to let Jason sit in that fire a little longer. He wanted the heat, now he had it. He was realizing that being a man isn't about the car you drive or the title on your door. It is about what you do when the wall starts to crumble. And Jason was crumbling right along with it. I drove away, leaving my legacy burning in the hands of a fool, knowing that from the ashes I would be the only one who could rebuild it. But first I had to let it burn. The week that followed the loan approval was a study in silence. I sat in my rented room watching the digital breadcrumbs of my life disappear. $5 million left the corporate account. It bounced through a server in Malta, took a detour through a shell company in Panama, and finally landed in a private wallet that the bank's tracking software identified as belonging to a known syndicate. Jim had called me sweating, asking if we should freeze it. I told him to let it ride. The trap had to be absolute. Patricia spent that week in the Bahamas posting photos of blue water and white sand, blissfully unaware that she was financing her own destruction. But vacations end, and reality has a nasty habit of waiting at the arrivals gate. I was watching the GPS tracker on the Mercedes S-Class. It was parked at O'Hare International Airport in the international arrivals lane. Through the remote access to the dash cam, I could hear the rhythmic thumping of the wipers. It was raining in Chicago, a cold, miserable drizzle that washed away the memory of the tropical sun. Patricia was standing on the curb. She looked tan, rested, and expensive. She was wearing a white linen suit that was completely impractical for the weather, shivering slightly as she scanned the stream of cars. She checked her watch. Then she checked her phone. I could see her reflection in the side mirror of the car. She was smiling, texting, probably sending Tyler a message like, "Where are you, handsome? I am freezing." Tyler was supposed to have landed an hour earlier. He had told her he had to fly back separately because of a meeting with the whales, the big investors who were going to push Future Coin to the moon. 1 hour passed. The smile began to fade. The shivering became more pronounced. She stepped back into the car to warm up, slamming the door shut. The interior camera gave me a front row seat to her unraveling. She dialed a number. I knew exactly which number. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is not available." She hung up and dialed again. Her fingers were tapping frantically against the steering wheel. "He is just in a tunnel," she muttered to herself. "He is just in the underground parking." Another hour passed. The traffic at the terminal thinned out. The security guard tapped on her window, telling her she couldn't idle there anymore. She snapped at him, flashing her high-beam eyes, but she put the car in gear. She circled the terminal. Once. Twice. Panic is a slow poison. It starts in the stomach and works its way up to the throat. I watched it take hold of her. She pulled into a short-term parking spot and killed the engine. She grabbed her phone again, but this time she didn't open the dialer. She opened the crypto exchange app, the one Tyler had installed for her, the one that held the $5 million of borrowed money. I zoomed in on the interior camera feed. The screen of her phone was bright in the dim car. It loaded slowly. The little spinning wheel of death. Then the numbers appeared. Total portfolio value, 0. She blinked. She swiped down to refresh. The wheel spun again. Total portfolio value, $0. No. The word escaped her lips like a gasp. She tapped the transaction history. Transfer out external wallet. Status confirmed. It wasn't a market crash. It wasn't a dip. It was a withdrawal. Every single cent had been drained out at 4:00 a.m. that morning. "There has to be a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is a glitch. It is just a glitch. Tyler wouldn't. He is a partner." She dialed him again. This time the call didn't even go to voicemail. "This number has been disconnected." The phone slipped from her hand and fell into her lap. She sat there staring at the rain streaking the windshield. The reality was trying to break through the walls of her denial, but she wasn't ready to let it in. Not yet. She needed to see him. She needed to see his face and have him explain that this was just a security measure, that he was moving the money to a safer wallet. She started the car, the engine roaring to life with an aggressive growl that matched her desperation. She peeled out of the parking garage, scraping the rims against the concrete curb. She didn't care. She drove toward the city, weaving through traffic on the Kennedy Expressway at 90 miles an hour. I watched the speedometer climb on my laptop screen. She was driving like a madwoman. She was heading to the Gold Coast, to the luxury apartment Tyler had rented, the apartment she was paying for. I switched feeds. I pulled up the building security cameras for the apartment complex. I didn't have audio there, but the visuals were enough. I saw the Mercedes screech to a halt in the fire lane. Patricia jumped out, leaving the door wide open, ignoring the doorman who tried to greet her. She ran to the elevator, hammering the button. I switched back to her phone's microphone, which I had remotely activated. I could hear her breathing. Short, sharp gasps, like she was drowning. "Please be there," she prayed. "Please just be sleeping. Please just be surprising me." The elevator dinged. She ran down the hallway. I heard the fumble of keys. She jammed the key into the lock. It turned. She threw the door open. "Tyler," she screamed. "Tyler, where are you? The app is acting weird." Silence. I hacked into the apartment's own security system, a simple Nest camera in the living room that Tyler hadn't bothered to disconnect. The apartment was empty. And I don't mean he wasn't home. I mean it was erased. The furniture which had been rented was gone. The art on the walls was gone. The expensive rugs were gone. It was just a box of white walls and polished hardwood floors. There wasn't a sock, a toothbrush, or a note left behind. It was as if Tyler had never existed. Patricia walked into the center of the room. She spun around slowly. Her heels clicked on the empty floor, the sound echoing off the bare walls. She checked the bedroom. Empty. She checked the closet. Empty. She checked the bathroom. The only thing left was a small plastic bottle of hotel shampoo on the edge of the sink. She walked back to the living room and stood there. The magnitude of what had happened finally crashed down on her. The $5 million. The mortgage on the penthouse. The loan against the company. The burned bridges with her son. The humiliation of her husband. She had traded it all for a ghost. She wasn't a victim of a bad investment. She was the victim of a romance. A fiction written for an audience of one designed to extract maximum value before the credits rolled. She fell. It wasn't a graceful faint. Her legs just gave out. She crumpled onto the hard floor, her white linen suit staining with the dust of the empty apartment. She didn't scream at first. She just made this low, keening sound, like a wounded animal. Then the dam broke. She screamed. A raw, guttural scream of pure anguish that tore through the speakers of my laptop. She pounded her fists against the floor until I was sure she was bruising the bone. She curled into a ball, rocking back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably. "I am sorry," she choked out between sobs. "I am so sorry. I didn't know who she was apologizing to. Was it me? Was it Jason? Or was she apologizing to herself for being so catastrophically stupid? I watched her for a full minute. I watched the woman who had stood on a stage a week ago and called me a senile old man, now reduced to a weeping pile of regrets on a dirty floor. I should have felt happy. I should have felt triumphant. But I didn't. I felt a cold, hard resolution. This was the payoff. This was the moment I had engineered. But the game wasn't over. She was broken, yes, but she was still dangerous. She still had the legal guardianship paperwork. She still had Jason in my chair. And when a cornered animal realizes it is trapped, it doesn't just cry. It bites. I reached out and closed the laptop. The sound of her weeping cut off, instantly replaced by the hum of the refrigerator in my dingy rental. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. "Cry it out, Patricia," I said to the glass, "because tomorrow you are going to need your strength. The court hearing is in 48 hours, and I have one more video to show the judge." I picked up my phone and called Maya. "It is done," I said. "He is gone. She is wrecked. Get the paperwork ready. We are going for the throat." The air in courtroom 4B was stale, recycled, and thick with the scent of impending doom. It was a windowless room illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed with a low headache-inducing vibration. I sat at the defendant's table alone. My lawyer, a good man named Caldwell, was sitting in the gallery behind me per my instructions. I wanted the court to see me. Just me. I wanted them to see the man Patricia claimed was a hollow shell. Across the aisle, Patricia sat next to Vance. She was wearing a modest black dress that made her look like a grieving widow, even though her husband was sitting 10 feet away. She was pale. Beneath the layers of expensive foundation, I could see the dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't just tired, she was terrified. I knew why. She was doing the math in her head over and over again. $5 million gone. A mortgage she couldn't pay. A loan shark interest rate ticking up by the second. Her only way out, her only lifeline to avoid prison or bankruptcy, was to win this hearing. She needed control of my company. She needed to liquidate my assets to cover the crater she had blown in her own life. Vance stood up, smoothing his silk tie. He looked confident. He thought this was a formality. He walked toward the judge, a stern woman named Judge Hawthorne, who had seen it all and looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice smooth and practiced. "We are not here to punish Mr. Sullivan. We are here to protect him. The evidence we have presented is irrefutable. We have the testimony of Dr. Evans, who confirms that Henry shows classic signs of advanced cognitive decline. We have the sworn affidavit of his stepson Jason, who has witnessed violent outbursts and dangerous forgetfulness. And we have the video evidence." Vance gestured to a screen where a paused video showed me yelling at a television. It was the same clip from the tablet, taken out of context, edited to make passion look like madness. "Mr. Sullivan built a great empire." Vance continued, turning to look at me with mock pity. "But the sun has set on that day. He is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. He is a danger to his financial stability, and potentially a danger to others. Just last week, he was seen wandering the streets in a tuxedo, sleeping in his truck. These are not the actions of a rational man. These are the cries for help of a mind that is lost." Patricia dabbed her eyes with a tissue. It was a perfect performance. She looked at the judge with trembling lips. "I just want him to be safe, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice cracking just enough to be convincing. "I love him. I can't watch him destroy himself." I watched her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a strange kind of awe. It was impressive, really. She was staring into the abyss of financial ruin. She knew that the man she loved had robbed her and abandoned her. She knew she was standing on a trapdoor, and yet she was lying with such conviction. She was fighting for her survival, and I was the sacrifice she was willing to make. Vance called his first witness. It was Dr. Evans, a man I had met once for a routine physical 5 years ago. He walked to the stand, avoiding my gaze. He testified that my recent behavior was consistent with rapid onset dementia. He used big words: frontotemporal degeneration, executive dysfunction. He made it sound medical. He made it sound hopeless. I knew Vance had paid him. I knew his practice was struggling, and a hefty consulting fee from the Sullivan estate was hard to turn down. Then came Jason. He walked in wearing one of my suits. He looked tired, too. The disaster at the construction site had taken a toll, but he still had that arrogant tilt to his chin. He sat in the witness box and lied. He told the court that I forgot his name. He told them I left the stove on. He told them I threw a stapler at him in the office. I sat there, stone still. I didn't object. I didn't shake my head. I let them pile the dirt on my grave. I let them build a mountain of lies so high that they thought I would never be able to climb out. The judge listened to it all, scribbling notes. She looked at the medical reports. She looked at the financial statements Vance provided, which showed erratic spending. Of course, they were erratic. I had been moving money to secure the trap. But to her, it looked like chaos. After 2 hours of testimony, Vance rested his case. He walked back to his table and sat down, patting Patricia on the hand. She let out a long, shaky breath. She thought she had done it. She thought she had secured the golden parachute. Judge Hawthorne adjusted her glasses and looked down at me. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was soft, almost gentle. The kind of tone you use with a confused child. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "your attorney is not present at the table. Do you wish to call a recess to wait for him? Or do you have a statement you wish to make on your own behalf?" The room went silent. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys. Vance leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. He expected me to ramble. He expected me to start shouting about conspiracies, which would only prove his point, that I was paranoid and delusional. I stood up. I didn't use the table for support. I stood up straight, pulling my shoulders back. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at Jason, who refused to meet my eyes. I looked at Patricia, who was staring at me with a mixture of fear and defiance. And finally, I looked at the judge. My voice when I spoke was not the voice of a senile old man. It was the voice that had commanded 3,000 workers. It was the voice that had negotiated with mayors and union bosses. It was a deep, resonant baritone that filled the room without the need for a microphone. "Your Honor," I said, "I do not need a lawyer today. The truth does not require a law degree to understand. It only requires eyes." Vance scoffed audibly. The judge shot him a warning look. "Mr. Vance has told you a very compelling story." I continued walking slowly toward the center of the room. "He has told you a story about a man who is losing his mind, a man who needs to be put out to pasture. It is a sad story. It is a tragedy. But unfortunately for Mr. Vance, and especially for my wife, it is a work of fiction." I stopped in front of the judge's bench. "They claim I am confused. They claim I cannot manage my money. They claim I am a danger to this family. I am not here to argue with them. I am not here to shout. I am here to show you exactly who is confused and who is dangerous." I turned around and pointed to the large projection screen that Vance had used to show the edited video of me. "I asked the court for 15 minutes, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Just 15 minutes. I have prepared a short film. A documentary, if you will. It chronicles the events of the last 7 days. And when it is over, Your Honor, you will not be asking who should be my guardian. You will be asking the bailiff to arrest the people sitting at that table." Vance jumped up. "Objection. This is highly irregular. We have not seen this evidence. This is an ambush. The judge looked at Vance, then she looked at me. She saw the clarity in my eyes. She saw the steel in my spine. She was a smart woman. She knew something didn't smell right about this case. Overruled, she said, leaning back in her chair. I want to see the film. I nodded to the bailiff who I had spoken to earlier. He handed me a remote control. I walked back to my table and plugged in my laptop. The screen flickered to life. I looked at Patricia one last time. The color had drained completely from her face. She knew. Deep down in the pit of her stomach, she knew. I pressed play. The lights in the courtroom dimmed, and the first image that appeared on the screen wasn't me. It was Patricia and Tyler sitting in my living room raising a glass of my wine. The audio was crystal clear. To the ATM, Tyler's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers. The gasps from the gallery were audible. But that was just the opening credit. The real show was about to begin. The screen went black, but the image of my wife and her lover toasting to my demise seemed to burn in the air like a ghostly afterimage. The courtroom was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on everyone present. The judge was staring at the blank screen, her mouth set in a grim line. Vance, the slick lawyer who had been so confident 5 minutes ago, was now frantically whispering something to Patricia, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and filled with a dawn of horror that was just beginning to break. She knew I had caught her. She knew her moral high ground had just been nuked, but she was still clinging to one desperate hope: the money. She probably thought that even if I proved she was an adulteress, she was still entitled to half. She thought the worst-case scenario was a messy divorce where she walked away with $20 million instead of 40. She was wrong. I turned away from the screen and walked back to the defense table. I didn't sit down. I reached into my leather briefcase, the old battered one that I had carried to every major closing for 3 decades. I pulled out a thick binder bound in blue leather. It wasn't a medical record. It wasn't a guardianship paper. It was something far more powerful. I walked to the bench and placed the binder gently in front of Judge Hawthorne. The sound of the heavy book hitting the wood echoed through the room. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm and leveled. Mr. Vance has spent the last 2 hours arguing that I am incompetent to manage my own assets. He has argued that my wife needs to be appointed guardian to protect the Sullivan estate. But there is a fundamental flaw in his argument. A flaw that had he done even a shred of due diligence he would have discovered weeks ago. I paused, looking back at Vance. He had stopped whispering. He was staring at the blue binder as if it were a bomb. There is no Sullivan estate for me to manage, I said. And there certainly isn't one for Patricia to steal. Vance stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Objection. Mr. Sullivan is clearly confused. We have the property deeds. We have the bank records. His name is on everything. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled all day. My name is on the title as a trustee, Mr. Vance, I corrected him, not as the owner. I turned back to the judge. 10 years ago, after a health scare that turned out to be nothing, I did some thinking. I realized that wealth attracts wolves. I wanted to ensure that the company I built and the assets I acquired would be protected forever, not just for me, but for the true legacy I wanted to leave behind. So I created the Sullivan Irrevocable Trust. I saw the judge's eyebrows shoot up. She knew exactly what that meant. Irrevocable. It was a legal fortress. Once assets go in, they don't come out, and the terms cannot be changed, not by me, and certainly not by a court order in a family dispute. I opened the binder to the first page. Every single asset, Your Honor. The penthouse on Lake Shore Drive, the commercial properties downtown, the majority shares of Sullivan Holdings, the liquid cash accounts. All of it was transferred into this trust a decade ago. I do not own them. I am simply the appointed lifetime manager. I draw a salary. I have the right to live in the properties, but I do not hold the title. I heard a gasp from the gallery. It was Maya. She knew about the trust, but she hadn't known the extent of it. She covered her mouth, her eyes shining with pride. But here is the most interesting part. I continued flipping to a page marked with a red tab. Section 4, paragraph B, the Morality and Spousal Conduct Clause. I looked at Patricia. She was trembling now, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard, her knuckles were white. "Read it, Patricia," I said, pointing to the document. "Or don't. I know you hate reading fine print. I will summarize it for you. The trust stipulates that if the lifetime manager's spouse engages in infidelity, or acts in a way that brings public disrepute to the family name, or attempts to legally incapacitate the manager, through fraudulent means, all beneficiary rights and spousal privileges are terminated. Immediately, automatically, without the need for a divorce decree." The room was spinning for Patricia. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just losing the lawsuit. She was losing the foundation of her entire reality. "This means, Your Honor," I said, turning back to the judge, "that as of 7 days ago, when my wife engaged in a sexual relationship with Mr. Mitchell Reynolds, also known as Tyler, in my home she ceased to have any claim to the trust assets. She has no right to live in the penthouse. She has no right to the company shares. She has no right to a single dime of the money she tried to seize." Vance was pale. He was flipping through his own papers looking for a way out, but there was none. An irrevocable trust was ironclad. "But wait," Vance stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The loan, my client, Mrs. Sullivan secured a liquidity loan last week. $5 million. The bank approved it. It was secured against the penthouse equity." I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. "Ah, yes, the loan," I said. "I was wondering when we would get to that." I walked over to the witness stand, where Jason was still sitting, looking like a deer in headlights. I leaned on the railing. "You see, since the penthouse belongs to the trust, and Patricia is not a trustee, she had no legal authority to pledge it as collateral. The bank approved the loan based on her fraudulent representation that she was the owner." I turned to look directly at Patricia. "You signed those papers, Patricia. You signed a personal guarantee. You told the bank you owned the asset. That is called bank fraud. But more importantly, since the collateral is invalid, the trust is not liable for that debt. You are." Patricia let out a small, strangled squeak. $5 million, I said, spelling it out for her. "You borrowed $5 million in your own name. You sent it to a con artist who has already vanished. And now the bank is going to come looking for their money. They can't take the penthouse. It belongs to the trust. They can't take the company. It belongs to the trust. So they are going to come for you. They will take your jewelry. They will take your personal savings. They will take your car. And when that isn't enough, they will garnish every paycheck you ever earn for the rest of your life." Patricia slumped forward, her head hitting the table with a dull thud. She didn't faint this time. She just gave up. The weight of the truth crushed the air out of her lungs. She had played the Game of Thrones, and she had just been checkmated by a piece of paper she didn't even know existed. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I ask that you dismiss this guardianship petition with prejudice. I ask that you issue an immediate eviction order for Patricia Sullivan and Jason Miller from all trust properties. And I ask that you forward the transcript of this hearing, along with the evidence of the fraudulent loan application, to the district attorney's office." Judge Hawthorne looked at the binder, then at the video screen, and finally at Patricia, who was sobbing quietly into her arms. The judge's face was hard. She had no sympathy for predators who got caught in their own traps. "Petition denied." Judge Hawthorne slammed her gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Mr. Sullivan, you are clearly of sound mind. In fact, you seem to be the only person in this family who knows what is going on. The temporary guardianship is revoked immediately." She turned her gaze to Vance. "And, Counselor," she added, her voice dripping with ice, If I find out you knew about this fraudulent loan, I will have you disbarred so fast your head will spin. Get your client out of my courtroom." Vance didn't argue. He started packing his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. He wanted to get as far away from Patricia as possible. He knew she couldn't pay his legal fees anymore. I stood there watching the ruins of my family. Jason was crying, actually crying, wiping his nose on the sleeve of my expensive suit. Patricia was a broken heap. I walked over to her. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't offer comfort. I leaned down just close enough so only she could hear me. "You wanted a younger man," I whispered. "You paid $5 million for him. I hope he was worth it." I straightened up and buttoned my jacket. I felt lighter. The anger was gone, replaced by a clean, empty space where my marriage used to be. It was time to fill that space with something better. I turned and walked toward the back of the courtroom. Maya was standing there, smiling through tears. I walked past the gallery, past the shocked faces of the spectators. I walked out the double doors and into the hallway. The air out there tasted different. It didn't taste like betrayal anymore. It tasted like freedom. I had my company back. I had my dignity back. And I had taught a lesson that would be talked about in Chicago for a generation. But I wasn't done yet. There was one loose end. A loose end with a barcode tattoo. And I had a feeling that Mitch Reynolds was about to find out that stealing from Hank Sullivan was the worst retirement plan he could have ever made. The courtroom was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a tomb after the stone has been rolled shut. Patricia sat slumped in her chair, a woman hollowed out by the realization that she was not only bankrupt, but had been played for a fool by the very man she destroyed her marriage for. But I was not finished. The civil matter of the trust was settled, yet there was still the matter of the criminal conspiracy that had brought us here. I looked over at Jason. He was trying to make himself invisible, shrinking into his oversized suit, his eyes darting toward the exit sign. He thought that because the judge had dismissed the guardianship, he could just walk away. He thought his only crime was being an incompetent CEO. He was wrong. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air, "I have one final piece of evidence to present. While my wife was the face of this operation, she was not the mastermind. Or rather, she was not the only one looking to profit from my demise." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen flickered back to life. The timestamp on the video was from 3 days ago. The location was the hallway outside my office at Sullivan Holdings. The camera angle was high, hidden in a smoke detector I had installed myself years ago. On the screen, Jason was pacing back and forth. He looked nervous. Then Tyler walked into the frame. He was carrying a duffel bag. "Going somewhere?" Jason asked on the video. Tyler laughed, adjusting the strap on his shoulder. "The heat is getting too high, kid. The bank is asking questions about the wire transfer. I am taking the next flight to the Caymans." Jason didn't try to stop him. He didn't threaten to call the police. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice, but the audio enhancement picked it up clearly. "What about my cut?" Jason hissed. "We had a deal, Mitch. You get the $5 million from the house, I get the power of attorney over the company accounts. But if you leave now, the old man might fight back. I need cash to pay off the doctor for the fake medical report." Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He slapped it into Jason's chest. "There is 50 grand. That is enough to keep Dr. Evans quiet about the edited tapes. The rest is yours when the old man is locked up in the nursing home. Good luck, CEO." Tyler walked away whistling. Jason opened the envelope, thumbing through the stack of $100 bills with a greedy, satisfied smirk. I paused the video on that frame. Jason's face illuminated by the money twisted into a mask of pure avarice. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just gasps this time. It was a collective outcry of disgust. Patricia slowly turned her head toward her son. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a horror that transcended money. You knew she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. You knew he was a con artist. You knew he was stealing the money, and you let me sign the loan. Jason scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking. It is a deep fake, he screamed, pointing at the screen. That is AI. I never said that. He is framing me. But his voice lacked conviction. He sounded like a cornered rat squealing before the trap snaps. I turned to the back of the courtroom. I didn't need to say a word. The heavy oak doors swung open with a resounding thud that silenced Jason's protests. 3 officers in dark suits walked in. They weren't regular beat cops. The gold badges on their belts identified them as detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit. Jason froze. He looked at the door, then at the window as if calculating if he could jump from the 2nd floor. Jason Miller, the lead detective, announced, his voice booming. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery of medical documents, and elder abuse. Jason tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled over the railing, tripping over his own feet. The detectives were on him in seconds. They didn't treat him gently. They slammed him against the table, the sound of his face hitting the wood echoing through the room. Mom screamed as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Mom, tell them I was just helping you do something. Patricia didn't move. She couldn't move. She was watching the boy she had spoiled, the boy she had chosen over her husband, being dragged away like a common criminal. The son who had agreed to let her lover steal $5 million from her just so he could get a piece of the action. The detectives hauled him toward the door. As he passed me, Jason looked up. His eyes were wild, pleading. Hank, please, he sobbed. I am your son. You raised me. Don't let them take me. I looked down at him. I saw the toddler I had taught to walk. I saw the teenager I had taught to drive. And I saw the man who had paid a doctor $50,000 to certify that I was insane. I didn't raise a criminal, Jason, I said softly. You did that all on your own. The doors closed behind him, cutting off his wails. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I turned back to the judge. She looked shaken. She had presided over hundreds of cases, but the sheer cruelty of a son selling out his mother was something that clearly disturbed her. The video evidence has been submitted to the district attorney, Your Honor, I said quietly, along with the confession from Dr. Evans, who decided to cooperate this morning in exchange for leniency. I looked at Patricia. She was the only one left. The table where her legal team had sat was empty. Vance had slipped out the side door the moment the police walked in. She was alone in the center of the room. She looked at the empty space where Jason had been. Then she looked at the screen where her lover had mocked her. Then she looked at her hands, empty of rings, empty of money, empty of hope. It hit her all at once. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind the crushing weight of reality. She let out a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a moan, a low, broken sound of a soul snapping in two. She slid out of her chair and collapsed onto the floor. She didn't try to catch herself. She just fell, a heap of black fabric and ruined dreams. She curled into a ball, clutching her chest, gasping for air, as if the room had suddenly run out of oxygen. Hank, she wheezed, reaching a hand out toward me. Please. The debt. The bank. They will take everything. I have nowhere to go. I looked at her hand. It was the same hand that had signed the papers to evict me. It was the same hand that had poured wine for the man who robbed her. I felt a ghost of the love I once had for her. It was a faint, distant ache, but it wasn't enough to bridge the ocean of betrayal she had created. You have your health, Patricia, I said, my voice void of malice but full of finality. You can work. You can start over. It will be hard. It will be humble. but it is the only way you will ever learn the value of what you threw away. I turned to the judge and gave a slight bow. Thank you, Your Honor. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps steady and sure. I didn't look back at the woman sobbing on the floor. I didn't look back at the screen. I walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway where Maya was waiting. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. A real hug. Strong and fierce. "It is over, Dad," she whispered. "Yes," I said, looking out the window at the Chicago skyline standing tall and proud against the gray sky. It is over, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation is solid. The morning sun over Lake Michigan was gentle, warming my face as I cast my line into the still water. It had been a month since the gavel fell, a month since the storm finally broke and left the air clean and crisp. Sitting next to me on the wooden dock was Maya. She wasn't wearing a suit or an apron today. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, holding her own fishing rod with a relaxed grace I hadn't seen in years. We didn't need to talk. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable. It was the silence of two people who had fought a war back to back and won. I reeled in my line, slowly watching the ripples spread across the surface. My phone was turned off. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't care about the stock market or construction schedules. The company was in good hands. Maya had stepped in as interim CEO, and to the surprise of no one but the doubters, she was brilliant. She had the grit I had at her age, but she also had the compassion I had sometimes forgotten. She hired back Frank and the old crew on her first day. She visited the sites. She listened. The company stock was up 15%, but more importantly, the morale was back. The men respected her not because of her name, but because she showed up. I thought about Patricia. I heard through the grapevine that the bank had seized everything. The jewelry, the cars, the designer clothes. She avoided prison by pleading guilty and agreeing to a restitution plan that would take her 3 lifetimes to pay off. Last I heard, she was working the night shift at a cleaning service downtown, scrubbing the floors of office buildings she used to think she was too good to enter. It was a harsh fate, but justice is rarely gentle. She was learning the value of $1 the hard way, one mop bucket at a time. As for Jason, he was awaiting sentencing in county jail. His friends had abandoned him. His arrogance stripped away, leaving a frightened boy who finally had to answer for his own choices. I looked at Maya. She caught my eye and smiled. "You know, Dad," she said softly. "You never told me what you whispered to her in the courtroom." I chuckled, casting my line out again. "I told her that some things can't be bought," I said, "and that included dignity." Maya nodded, looking out at the water. "I am glad you called me Dad. I missed you." I reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "I missed you too, sweetheart. I am just sorry it took a catastrophe to wake me up." We sat there for a long time, watching the bobbers dance on the water. I realized then that this was what retirement was supposed to be. Not parties, not yachts, not pretending to be young. It was this: peace, family. The simple, quiet joy of knowing that the person sitting next to you loves you for who you are, not for what you can give them. I had built skyscrapers that touched the clouds. I had amassed a fortune that could buy small countries. But sitting there on that dock with my daughter by my side and a cheap fishing rod in my hand, I felt richer than I ever had in the penthouse. I had almost lost everything that mattered because I was too busy protecting the things that didn't. I had let a fox into the henhouse because she flattered my ego, and I had pushed away the only person who would have defended me with her life. It is a hard lesson for a man to learn at 70, but I learned it, and I am still standing. I reeled in my line and set the rod down. I turned to look at you, the person listening to this story. I know you are out there. Maybe you are a father who feels unappreciated. Maybe you are a husband who suspects something isn't right. Maybe you are just someone trying to do the right thing in a world that seems to reward the ruthless. Don't let them break you. Don't let them make you doubt your own mind. They will call you old. They will call you obsolete. They will try to take what you have built and tell you that you don't deserve it anymore. They mistake your silence for weakness. They mistake your patience for fear. But they are wrong. Never underestimate a man who has built an empire from two empty hands. We know how to lay foundations, but we also know how to use a sledgehammer. Our silence isn't surrender. It is strategy. It is the sound of us loading the ammunition. It is the deep breath before we pull the trigger. So if you are in the middle of a storm right now, hold your ground. Trust your gut. And remember that the truth is the only weapon that never runs out of bullets. I stood up and picked up my tackle box. Maya stood up with me, linking her arm through mine. We walked back toward the truck, leaving the lake behind us. The water was calm, the sky was blue, and the future was wide open. It is funny how life comes full circle in the construction business. You spend years building things up, but sometimes the most important work you do is demolition, clearing away the rot so you can build on solid ground again. 6 months after the trial, I found myself walking through the lobby of the Meridian Tower, one of the first skyscrapers I ever built in downtown Chicago. I wasn't there as the owner, but as a guest. Maya was receiving the Businesswoman of the Year award in the grand ballroom on the top floor. As I walked toward the elevators, I saw a cleaning crew buffing the marble floors I had laid 30 years ago. The sound of the industrial polisher was loud, drowning out the soft jazz playing in the lobby. I stopped. There was a woman on her hands and knees, scrubbing a stubborn scuff mark near the fountain. She was wearing a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big, and her hair, once dyed and styled to perfection, was pulled back in a messy graying bun. It was Patricia. She looked up as my shadow fell over her. For a second, her eyes lit up with that old familiar spark of manipulation, a reflex to charm her way out of a mess. She started to stand, perhaps to ask for help, perhaps to beg. "Henry," she breathed, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. I knew you would come." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just looked at her. I looked at the woman who had tried to put me in a mental institution so she could buy a yacht with a con artist. I looked at the hands that had signed my eviction notice. "I didn't come for you, Patricia," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large lobby. "I came to see my daughter, the one you tried to erase from my life." "Please," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "The debt is suffocating me. I live in a studio apartment with 3 other people. I'm tired, Henry. I'm so tired." I reached into my pocket. For a second, she looked hopeful, thinking I was pulling out a checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a single, crisp $20 bill. I dropped it on the floor next to her bucket. "You missed a spot," I said. I walked past her to the elevator, pressing the button for the penthouse. I didn't look back. It wasn't cruelty. It was the final payment on a lesson she needed to learn. You cannot build a life on the backs of people you despise and expect them to carry you forever. Upstairs, the doors opened to a different world. Maya was on stage commanding the room, talking about ethical leadership and the future of Sullivan Holdings. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a titan in her own right. She had taken the bricks I gave her and built a castle, not a prison. Watching her, I realized that the $5 million Patricia lost was the best investment I ever made. It bought me the truth. It bought me my freedom. And it bought me the clarity to see who really deserved a seat at my table. So if you are holding on to someone toxic because you are afraid of being alone or afraid of what people will say, let them go. The peace you find on the other side is worth every penny. This is Henry Sullivan signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. And now a lesson I learned from this journey. Trust is the most expensive currency in the world, and you should never spend it on someone who hasn't earned it. We often ignore the red flags because we want to be loved, or we want to feel young, or we simply want peace. But blindness is not peace. Real peace comes from facing the uncomfortable truth and removing the people who are only there for the shade of your tree, not the strength of your roots. Protect your legacy, but more importantly, protect the people who would stand by you, even if that legacy turned to dust. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the anger and the redemption, please leave a comment below. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me if you have ever had to stand up for yourself against the people you loved. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more stories about justice and resilience, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, keep your head up and your eyes open, with love and respect.